Hello again. I've spoken before about David Olusoga and his weird perspective. Here is his latest book, and it is intended for children. The good Lord help them. The fact that it is a children's book makes it very important that it should be accurate, factual, and impartial. It is, alas, none of these things. By various tricks, some linguistic, others using downright deception, Olusoga puts forward a horribly biased and tendentious view of British history, tricked out as an objective account of the last 2,000 years or so of this country's history. Let's have a look at the book and see how he manages to be so dishonest while all the while posing as an academic. To begin with, you will note that the book is called Black and British. Yeah. It says on the back, join award-winning historian and broadcaster David Olusoga on a stunning visual journey through 1800 years of black British history, charting the histories of black people in Britain from Roman Africans guarding Hadrian's Wall right up to today. Right. Here then is the first trick played upon the unwary. By talking of the histories of black people in Britain, and then in the next breath mentioning Roman Africans guarding Hadrian's Wall, the obvious and inescapable conclusion is that we are being told that those soldiers guarding the wall were black people from sub-Saharan Africa. This is confirmed when we read the book. Let's open the book here and read the right. When I was at school, there was no black history. None of the black people from the past who we know about today were ever mentioned by my teachers, and my textbooks contain nothing about the role black people have played in the story of Britain. So what I presumed was that there have not been any black people in British history. Okay, and then he goes on to say this. It was only when I became a teenager and was able to read grown-up history books that I learned there have been black people throughout much of British history, all the way back to the Roman conquest. This then is the explicit claim that there were black Africans in Britain during the Roman occupation a couple of thousand years ago. This ludicrous claim is by way of being a staple now of Black History Month in schools, and I'm sorry to say it's accepted by many children and young people as simply being a fact. Let's have a look at what Olusoga says about it. Here's a vague potted history of the Romans in Britain, and you can see there's a black soldier, black Roman soldier there. He says that the people that came to Britain included people from Africa who came to Roman Britain. Yes, they included people from North Africa, for example, Roman settlers, Phoenicians and Berbers, not black Africans. Right, let's look at the next page. Here we are. Roman soldiers. Black Roman soldiers yet, guarding Hadrian's Wall. See those pictures? Right, that's fake history. It's completely untrue. He talks about the Aurelian Moors. Yes, there was a unit called the Aurelian Moors. Those Moors came from the Roman province of Mauritania, which is the coastal area of modern Morocco. They were not black at all, but Berbers. The Berbers were as white as, say, most Turks today. We have pictures of them. By calling them Africans, Olusoga is playing a little bit of a linguistic trick, because these days, if we talk about Africans here and say, oh, Africans have moved in next door to me, we don't generally mean Berbers, we mean black Africans, people from below the Sahara. So that's a linguistic trick he's playing. He hopes that children would assume that there were soldiers from sub-Saharan Africa on Hadrian's Wall, which there were not. Here too is the ivory bangle lady from York, whom he also says was African. According to Olusoga, from studying Ivory Bangle Lady's skull and the chemicals in her bones, archaeologists found she was probably mixed race with a North African background, and she didn't grow up in York. Then he goes on to talk a bit more about African Romans. This is all nonsense as well. Yeah, he mentions a skull. The skull was indeed measured to try and determine her race, but this is an appallingly inaccurate way of measuring anybody's ethnicity. The SS had an entire department of racial hygiene in the 30s and 40s, and they tried by measuring people's skulls to see which race they belonged to. It's rather been discredited everywhere except in books like this. The so-called Beachy Head Lady in Sussex was claimed as African on the same grounds as the Ivory Bangle Lady, but you won't hear much about her these days because DNA testing shows that she really came from Cyprus. And yet her skull was measured in exactly the same way as the so-called Ivory Bangle Lady's skull, which Olusoga thinks tells us that she was from Africa. Not really. Olusoga says that chemicals in her bones, where are we now? Chemicals in her bones, archaeologists found she was probably mixed race and she didn't grow up in York. In fact, those chemicals, the isotopes, showed that she probably grew up in the West Country of England around Devon or Somerset, rather than North Africa. On the next page we have, I'm sorry to say, the famous black trumpeter again. I don't think we need to bother too much with him. Following that, we have another supposedly black person. This is another black Tudor as far as Olusoga is concerned. Mary Phyllis was born in Morocco. She came to London at the age of 6 or 7. Then he goes on about her baptism. Mary would have seen other black people living around her in London. Again, explicit claim that Mary Phyllis was black. There's no reason whatsoever to think that a woman from 16th century Morocco was black. She is much more likely to be Berber or Arab. The expression blackamoor was used generally for Muslims at that time, which I imagine that David Olusoga actually knows. There is something a little childlike about many of the things that Olusoga says, and I don't mean that offensively. Let me explain why. On page 56 we have this picture here. Can we all see this? 3 black Africans in 1895 with a white missionary that photographed in London. Okay, he describes this as an extraordinary royal visit by 3 kings from Bechuanaland in southern Africa, and he presents this as a sort of hidden history which he never learned about when he was at school. Perhaps he didn't spend much time in the school library. Here is a book which I bought a few years ago precisely because I was familiar with it at school. It is called Rover into Success by Baden-Powell, and a cracking read it is too. I'm a great fan, needless to say, of Baden-Powell. I don't suppose that will surprise anybody. Okay, I remember this book from many years ago. What, 60 years ago? It was published in 1930. Here on page 120 is an account of that very same visit by the chiefs which Olusoga thinks he is bringing to light and about which he did not learn at school. There is even a photograph of one of the Africans examining an English athlete. Yeah? Baden-Powell was in charge of showing the men around London in 1895. Okay, here is a question. If I knew all about this 60 years ago from a book in my school library, what stopped David Olusoga finding out about it when he was at school? Nobody has hidden any of this history. It's there. It's on display. This book was published in 1930. This is not hidden history. If he didn't learn about it at school, perhaps he wasn't paying attention. I'll give one more brief section because I really can't waste too much time on this foolishness. I just thought I would draw people's attention to it. Okay, he's talking about the First World War and says, the British West Indies Regiment fought in Egypt and the Middle East. When West Indian soldiers from the regiment were sent to France, they found that they were mostly put to work doing jobs like digging trenches and moving supplies. It was important and dangerous work. It was not the fighting they had trained for. Guess what? Both my grandfathers dug trenches and moved supplies. It wasn't what they'd trained for either. It was a bloody war. Sorry for the... right, here is the 1919 Victory Parade in London after the end of the First World War. He says here, in July 1919, a Victory Parade was held in London to celebrate the official end of the war. Nearly 15,000 service people from the British, he means service men, there weren't any women there, from the British Empire marched through the city, but the African and West Indian regiments which had fought for Britain were not invited to take part. That's because there were so few of them. There was no shortage of Indians in that parade because, of course, about 1 million Indians fought in the First World War, as opposed to fewer than 15,000 Caribbeans. Here's the claim that Charles Wotton was murdered during a riot in 1919. No mention of his shooting 2 police officers, I observe. This book really is the pits, and I do not feel it's worth spending any more time on. It is disgraceful that this nonsense is in many school libraries now.